Well, hey, everybody. I think we should get started. I am thrilled to be able to have a conversation around digital trust as we roll towards the end of Cybersecurity Awareness Month. I think over the next hour, Kate and I are going to really talk about what this means and kind of the state of things. But while we're doing that, we've got a really active chat going. And so by all means, ask questions. We've got a team that are supporting us, and Kate and I are pretty good at being able to take a look at what's in the chat. So by all means, we'd like for this to be really as conversational as possible. And so don't be shy. I also want to make a quick nod to the other cybersecurity work that's been going on. So I know both from Arizona State University and from the University of Toronto, there have been a number of different sessions, different student panels, that kind of thing. So if you didn't catch one of those, they'll be posted on our respective YouTubes, and you could catch up with some of the stuff that we've done for the week. Let's roll into some introductions. It is a real pleasure to be sitting here with Kate Giovacchini, who's the Executive Director of Engineering out at Arizona State University. Kate, you're one of the folks in higher ed that I think just has this really lovely mix of a private sector experience before you came into the university, and then what you've been at ASU a decade, a little more, something like that. And then in that capacity, you've worked inside the registrar's office, you've worked with the incredible engine that is ASU Online. Are they going to hit 100,000 students this year? Something like that with ASU Online? And so, I got to, I think, really appreciate the kind of work that you do there. Now you're in the central IT group at ASU, leading an engineering group, and what's like 150, 160 engineers in that group.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, you do a tremendous amount of work with foundations. And so I'm hoping a lot of what we can talk about today is some of the work that you do on that side of the house with groups like the Gates Foundation, really thinking about digital transformation in your role as managing director of the Trusted Learner Network. I love that you've got this student oriented experience across your career and the way you've kind of woven that into a variety of different units that you've worked with. So I'm hoping both for our colleagues that are on the chat and as we kind of weave through that you can share some of that journey with us. But so everyone, please welcome Kate.
Thank you very much, Donna. It's lovely to be with you, and I'd love to return the favor and formally introduce you as well. So really, really pleased to be here with Donna Kidwell, the acting CIO at University of Toronto. I know this from personal experience that Donna is an accomplished information technology leader with 18 years of experience in large R1 public institutions, now a transnational leader in information technology in fabulous institutions as such. I came to know Donna originally as the Chief Technology Officer for Ed Plus at ASU, again, that arm that executes on our online programs and also operates as sort of an innovation wing, a skunk works, an R&D space for next realm learning technologies. I joined Donna again, moving over to the central part of our IT org, what we call enterprise technology, when she became the Chief Information Security and Digital Trust Officer. I know Donna as an entrepreneur, as a leader, as a bringer together of people, and as someone that is passionate about digital trust. Donna, I'm looking forward to digging into all of this with you. So where would you like to start?
Let's start with what exactly is digital trust. I think that we all want trustworthy experiences. I think a lot about extending trust. So when you've got something that you trust, how does that then extend it across both human relationships and the kind of digital experiences that we have? But I'm like, where do you start? How do you even define it in the work that you're doing?
I think it's a great question. As we go along, I think it's going to become more and more obvious that I come from a humanities background with the way that I frame things. So for folks that are going to enjoy that journey, welcome. For folks that are going to be annoyed by it, I'm so sorry. It's just how my brain works. When I think about technology, I always try to position in the lived experiences that we have here. And the way that I anchor those lived experiences is in the sort of interpersonal and institutional trust sort of frameworks that we already operate in. So trust we can define as, sort of embracing an uncertainty to get a certain gain. So Donna, in all the time that we work together, I embraced a lot of uncertainty by taking risks, sharing things with you, right? Things that I was uncertain about, things that were worrying me, and in exchange, you were a very trustworthy ally and colleague, right? So you kept my confidences, you kept my secret secret. You took the time and thought to manage those secrets effectively, and hold them or bring them back to our conversations. I think we could think about that effectively in regards to trust as we move into the digital space as well. We also think about institutional trust, which for higher education, boy, are we familiar with that. In the US, and I would assume it's true in Canada as well, but students come to us and they give us in the US, social security number, their financial information, their parents' financial information, every place that they've lived in the past 8 years. And that's just when we say hello, right? That's our application. And so people have institutional trust in us to protect that information, right? But also to use that information effectively, so that we can enter into an ongoing set of transactions together. So take that all back to digital trust. So I think digital trust is an extension of those relationships, right? Do my transactions have contextual integrity? When I go to Google, does Google say, Kate, before I can do that search for best place to buy artichokes, I am going to need your checking account number, right? So that does not have contextual integrity. So it translates to that, but specific to my work with digital credentialing, I've really come to think about digital trust in the focus of learner and user agency. So how are we imbuing our constituents with the data that we're collecting about them, with the data that could be really valuable for them? How are we enhancing our trust relationship by creating more exchange and giving that data back so that a learner can use it for their future? Donna, I mean, that's one way to think about it, but you operate in a totally different space. So I return the question to you. How do you define digital trust?
Well, there's a lot to build on from what you've just laid out. Let's start on the institutional side. I've got a lot of colleagues in Norway, and in Norwegian, there's a word called tiltro, tiltro, and it's a word for trust that you have in an institution. They actually have a word for, yeah, yeah. We don't exactly have that word in English. Maybe because we don't exactly have that. And there are probably all sorts of, interesting reasons why here on the North American continent, we may have differing foundational beliefs about whether or not you inherently trust institutions. And yet here we are in large public research institutions that exist and have existed. U of T is about to enter its third century. Like we've existed for a while, in order to create like these really new, I don't know, the precipice, the edge of human knowledge and endeavor. And so there's a tremendous amount of trust that comes with just the fact that we're at universities, and yet we don't have good ways of really talking about it. Which is, I mentioned earlier, I think a lot about extending trust, and trust is built. So I do think a lot on, what are the kinds of actions that we take in terms of how we create our relationships and how we create a digital experience, and how we construct a contract, all the different kinds of human activities we get engaged in, and do they reflect the fact that we are being transparent around where we have trust and where we're building trust. I do think that, building on another one of the themes that you've got in the way you described it, this opportunity to offer transparency is one of the more interesting mechanisms I think we have for agency. And I love how agency is at the center. if we are not only offering something because we've got a lot of data. We sit in institutional crossroads that see everything from, as you pointed out, the data that students offer us in the application processes all through their experience across the campus. So there's myriad different ways that we're thinking about that. If we're able to be transparent about that data and then offer it back to learners so that they've got better decision-making tools about their own journey, that's a kind of exciting place to be. And if we thought about what we know, what we could know as institutions, and then how to think about and pivot that back in ways that would help um, learners more generally, and of course, staff and faculty. And I think there's lots of interesting opportunity there.
So two things have jumped out to me. You're talking about transparency and you're talking about trustworthiness. I wonder, there's some connection between those three things, between those two things and what we are defining as learner agency. And I'm wondering, Donna, what does learner agency mean to you as a lifelong learner, for instance?
Well, I one think all of our organizations should be learning organizations. My favorite way of thinking about a team is thinking of these fantastic, talented brains all sitting together and trying to uh, think about incredible opportunities and tackling hairy challenges, and you do that all through learning. So I think at the core of it, that agency component is really trying to make better decisions, be better informed about how you might approach a decision that's in front of you, be able to take highly innovative and informed risks and say things like, I feel confident that I can go do that because I understand as much as I possibly can. And I know that not only am I going to learn as I go through it, but I'm going to deepen my understanding. So in some ways, I think we are kind of the perfect type of organization to figure this out. And then, of course, the way we think about it could be shared in models in other kinds of public entities, other kind of private entities. But because we are organizations committed to learning, I think that ability to kind of pivot it back and say, okay, learning towards what end, learning with an intentionality towards where we want to go. That's really at the heart of how I think about agency. But how about you? Because you've been really building structures and systems in this. So you've got tactics around how you're thinking about agency.
So this framework of learning, transparency, trustworthiness, I think those things all fit in with the work that we're doing. So operating under the assumption that our learners are learners, and that there's a strong desire to have the access to understand how these processes work when you enter, say, into education or say into workforce. Being able to transparently see into, this is the information that my institution is learning about me, and my institution being trusting me to be able to handle, hold, or at least have some sort of custodianship over that data. When we say learning teams, what it also makes me think about is this concept of, so I'm done a lot of technology support types of roles. I've been a business analyst, I've been a project manager, I've run QA teams. And there's something that happens in the metacognition of good teams, right? Teams that when they work together, they can reflect back, right? Teams that can say, well, Donna, we did do that 12 months ago and we failed spectacularly, but we remember why and we learned our lessons. That I think is a result of this idea of transparency, reflection on prior experience in order to create more informed decisions and risks moving forward. So I just want to make that connection. I think it's interesting. When we think about the tactics for learner agency that we're executing with our work in the Trusted Learner Network, we are really foundationally set on this idea that I think I've already said this, but I'll reiterate it hopefully more elegantly. right? So when a learner comes to an institution, a higher education institution, we actually work together, the institution and the learner, to generate data, right? A course enrollment and a course grade cannot exist without an institution offering a course and a student transacting through that course, right? And learning and writing their papers and taking their exams and ultimately receiving a grade. So if we build off of this framework that we made this data together, it would not exist if not for that student being in the seat learning, logging on and learning, if not for us putting that forward. So when we think about this sort of functional co-ownership of data, what the TLN, what the Trusted Learner Network is all about is saying, hey, we have all this fabulous data. Let's put it into the hands of the learners. So really simple ideas like using verifiable technologies that can capture all the types of credentials, all the accomplishments, all the achievements of learning that have happened through, doesn't just have to be a college experience, it's all education. Employment is this way too, but we can capture these verifiably, put a copy into the hands of the learners, and learners can go run around the world with those and be able to present them in a verifiable way. That's what that's what learner agency means to us, and that is our primary tactic with this verifiable credential space. Let's start there, right? Baseline value is for our learners, they are gaining an awareness and a tool to reflect back on previous experience, to explore previous experience, to use that as a tool for moving forward. But the thing that gets really neat is what are all the ways in the future we're going to be able to, we, higher ed, students, we're going to be able to use that data to create really cool new stuff as we look forward. So, I mean, when we get down to the baseline of this, this is all about how do we empower people with data we already have that we know can be valuable to them in their own individual journeys.
Yeah, so that there's something I really love there about your emphasis on the co-creation of data, because like I think that's worth interrogating a little bit. Certainly the data exhaust, right? We at least in data worlds, we went for about a decade of talking about data exhaust. And one might argue that my relationship with both my Apple and my Google, what kind of world do I live in now? So I'm balancing, right? Though the experience that I'm having on two different platforms, all of which is co-created with a bunch of engineers and a bunch of product owners and a bunch of marketers that I don't really have any relationships with at all. I'm extending that. On campuses, though, like I think we've got, somebody can correct me in the chat because I'm still learning all the things. I think we have 23 registrars at the University of Toronto. And these registrars have extraordinary relationships at these really close proximate levels with the actual students. And of course, there's also a registrar, a prime registrar of the campus. That kind of ability to have this relationship between what we would think of as the data of a registrar and then the relationships, the way a student actually thinks about how they're going to navigate their relationships, I think that's fascinating. And so I'm serious about the ability for universities to think through how do we create a digital experience by which we are bringing some visibility into what data we have, how we use that data, what kinds of informed decisions we're making on the data, interesting ways to then make that discoverable to a learner, because frankly, they'll come up with stuff that we would never come up with. I think we're going to have 100,000 students on our campus. Your immersion at ASU is about the same number. If we are collaborating with them to understand how to use this incredible data in ways that actually serve, it's a pretty amazing. I realize though, as we kind of jumped into the Trusted Learner Network, can you describe what that is?
Sure. So thanks for asking. So the Trusted Learner Network is a digital verifiable credentialing initiative. ASU started on this journey about 5 years ago, and Donna Kidwell, you were one of the executive sponsors as we were getting started with that work. And we came to it, we had two components. We had blockchain emerging in sort of a more consumable commodity level way, which meant that we could start messing around with it. And then we also had this challenge of lifelong learning, right? So folks are living longer, reskilling more frequently in their career. And how are folks going to maintain the records of their achievement, to be able to track the records of their achievement, and really just have a resource that talks about that lifelong journey. So we started off with blockchain experiments and soon discovered, well, not soon, right? Those were real experiments with bare metal software engineering, and through that discovered some of the things that were really crucial and key. And number one of those was consent, right? That if we were going to empower learners with records at a finer granularity than what they already had, they needed to be completely consent driven. Only the learner consents to sharing those records. Nobody else gets that right, which is a total kind of flip-flop from the way that we really conceive of digital data ownership right now. Consent was a key component of that, and also interoperability. Rather than drafting a record that is exactly this right size that can only fit in a certain type of envelope, we recognize that what we need is a interoperable envelope to move those things around. So moving from there, this initiative has turned into, to your point, a philanthropically funded effort to create technologies that really, A, empower institutions to issue credentials in an interoperable, consent-driven way to their students, and B, to create a digital wallet experience that is directly for the learner to manage those credentials when they receive them. So really simple concepts. How do we free the data out of our systems in an interoperable, shareable, extensible way? And B, how do we create experiences for learners to be able to carry those around with them and start doing the types of cool stuff that we already know folks want to do, right? Which is like find jobs that match with the experiences that they have, discover education opportunities that they may not have expected. And the biggest one we hear is be able to make sense of a lifelong, of a lifetime of what the heck have I done? What are my skills, right? When I take English 405, like history of medieval England, what are the skills that I actually gained? Boy, you gained a lot of skills, right? Your critical thinking is through the roof, your contextual understanding, your ability to research, your ability to manage the uncertainty of examining evidence through time, right? Really powerful skills. How do we translate that? I see Russell Sutherland in the comments. Would one's digital credentials live on a blockchain of sorts, Russell? The answer is yes. For our technology suite, blockchain was a little the types of assurances that you need when exchanging cryptography or when exchanging things like cryptocurrency were a little overkill for our use case. So for us, we use a digital ledger to create the assurance and the proofs that we need. And then you say, over a decade ago, the Mozilla Foundation was working on transferable certifications. Absolutely. What became of that initiative? It's funny you mentioned that, because a lot of our colleagues are former Mozilla open badge aficionados, and we're really proud to partner with people as they continue to move that forward. They started out with open badge V1, an interoperable package to describe badges. Now we're on open badge V3, and V3 includes a wrapper of cryptographic proofs. That means that when I hand a copy of my certificate over to Donna, she can immediately verifiably prove that that is still correct, using some really cool technology called trust registries. But we're getting way afield here, I think, on digital trust. For me, the coolest thing about it is that we are developing technologies that embody this idea of trust, right? To make us more trustworthy stewards of really important, vital data. to make us more trustworthy co-creators of that data, and also to go back to Donna's component here, right? To create the transparency that helps describe, here's what your experiences are with us. And we want to create these durable records that you can examine, interrogate, and really activate to be able to move forward. I mean, I think in a digital trust world, we really are thinking about who data belongs to, and does it really ever belong to one party, and what are the immense benefits that become unlocked when we start thinking about that. But Donna, I wonder, well, I'm curious how that fits in with your role as acting CIO. You are effectively responsible for a lot of big machines that carry a lot of data and make a lot of processes work. When you think about digital trust in that executive context, where do you want to go? What sticks out most importantly to you as an opportunity?
Well, thank you for asking. I think one of the things that we get to do as you kind of navigate through your career and figure out, like, how do you
Mm,
become a really good manager? How do you figure out, where your contributions are as an individual contributor, as you start figuring out what are these technology teams and how do you contribute to teams? And then where I am now, and I'm figuring out, what does it look like to contribute in a variety of ways in an executive capacity. One of them is being able to really align across leadership,
mm,
who all, like, there's nobody that we're going to talk to who's a leader in a research institution like ours, who isn't passionate about our mission, who isn't passionate, especially public universities like us. We have missions of access. We think really deeply about whether or not our tables are inclusive. We think really deeply about whether or not that extends not only to our students, but to our librarians, to our staff, to our faculty.
mm,
We recognize that universities sit amongst university networks in some really interesting ways. So I really do try to pull individual projects and the actual day-to-day work that we're going to have to do to modernize an identity system, or to think about zero trust frameworks. It's Cybersecurity Month. Um, because those actually hit on some pretty profound things, like the nature of an identity, like the ability for a learner to, or start as a learner and then have this in. Some of us have careers throughout the university spectrum, where our roles in relationship with the universities are going to change in kind of profound ways. And so I think there's an opportunity to take the day-to-day work and actually appreciate that something pretty profound is happening. And so part of my approach is to really think of, how do we take something heady like the nature of identity, or the ability to really think deeply about consent. I love that you mentioned that. And then turn that into practical applications where they're lived experiences, where we're actually experiencing that. I think as a higher ed leader, one of my goals is to make sure that when we're creating these experiences, we're setting an example for the students on our campus of what it should look like when somebody respects your data, of what it should feel like when you traverse from one environment to another and you feel safe and secure. And like, you can take risks because you're going to take lots of them and be very vulnerable as you're learning new things. Like, the vulnerability comes without saying on a campus, you've got to be humble every day because you're learning something new. Like, how do we actually reduce that friction when it comes to the digital environments? I think we've got an unprecedented opportunity in front of us to really think about our projects as these demonstration points. Figure out what those models look like, how they work, figure out how our vendors need to interact with one another, figure out when we should be pushing back on them, because some of these things should be technology that we're upstream of and we're actually developing ourselves, not always beholden to the vendor ecosystem, like all those kinds of things. I also feel like, the work that we do as IT professionals, really should be traceable back to the mission, that we should be able to see that impact. And it can be hard. Our institutions can move a little slow. Our funding cycles get set on these annual calendars. And, there are other parts of the technology world that can move at much faster paces. So I think for us, it's really important to be able to look at individual milestones across the way and figure out where we're actually moving and progressing things forward really intentionally.
Wow. I see that really tying back to this concept of trustworthiness, right? And setting your watch to that mission and establishing that it's sort of everybody's job to honor the mission of the institution through all of our work. Like I said, so I've been at ASU and I've done all these roles that surround technology. And the one thing that has remained very constant through my privilege of working with engineers, both cybersecurity engineers and engineers of every stripe, is that when you sit down in the sprint planning meeting or the project architecture meeting, there's always our fabulous engineers that are setting the bar for safety, for security, but also for that mission, right? Like, are we designing this to be accessible, or are we
Right.
missing the pieces, right? And I am just, I talk to folks that in my community that live outside of our bubble, right? Our information technology bubble. And they really often look at technology as a black box, like a literal black box, right? That they only see one side and they have no idea how to penetrate into how uh, carrying that trustworthiness through is really incredible. And we think a lot about the demonstration piece, right? Like how do we want to train, and this is for enterprise technology at ASU in general, but what is our role in imbuing the next generations of digital citizens with a strong understanding of, like, this is how I want to be treated, right? This is the secret goal, is to say, man, your data belongs to you. You co-author that data with the organizations, institutions, tools that you interact with, and you have a right, a say. You are, as a co-author, you get to make decisions about how this works. And maybe part of our job is sort of making everybody into a little bit more of an engineer, right, through those trustworthy experiences. Donna, you have also been an entrepreneur, someone that's worked a lot with entrepreneurs as they have moved forward. Um, I'm curious how you sort of bring that angle, that whether it's agility or open-mindedness, or maybe the question is how did you arrive at digital trust in the first place? Like, where did that come from? And why is it
Mm.
something that's passionate to you? Why that makes you feel passionate?
I thank you for asking. I think entrepreneurship is this really interesting space because you you kind of by definition start with a limited set of resources, capabilities.
Mm.
Like entrepreneurs don't tend to start from places of great abundance. They tend to start in places of great scarcity, and then it's this um, necessity is the mother of invention. Like there's something in that that sparks, that pushes against the constraints, that pushes against the obstacle and seeks whether it's meaning or value or opportunity. There's something inherent in an entrepreneurial act that is seeking something more. And so I love that push. I think it's an interesting energy to harness.
Mm.
And I love the fact that it kind of comes with an expectation that you don't already have it all figured out, that you are actually on a journey towards figuring it out. I think it. It's inherent with a lot of optimism, and I don't know, Kate. You and I are both Americans in a time going into an election. Like, cherish optimism right now. I think that it's a thing that we should be actively nurturing and finding more purchase for. So that's really kind of the root of where I seek the entrepreneurial activities. I also feel like intrapreneurship So that's that entrepreneurial energy taken into an organization. Serves us really well in technology inside of universities, because we already have a set of constraints, either because of the way our budget models work, because of the desire to make sure that as much of our funding as possible is going directly towards student and research experiences as opposed to administrative experiences, right? Where we're kind of designed to try to ensure that we're good stewards of the resourcing that we have. So I find that to be an ever-ending place of creative thinking. I also feel like we're kind of playful, and there's a lot of play in entrepreneurship. There's a lot of opportunity to try something out and then be willing to learn from it and move forward, fail forward and fast kind of thinking, that serves us really well when we don't have a lot of resources and we've got massive, ambitious things that we want to do. I mean, it's not hard to Google our fellow institutions that have gone into like major ERP efforts and spent millions, hundreds of millions of dollars to be frustrated with the experiences that they come out of the other side of it with, because this work is hard. And so I think if you're a little bit scrappy and you kind of think, oh, but what are the changes that I could be making now that might actually then create more tectonic shifts in our whole ecosystem, it's a really advantageous way to approach what's really hard work. I mean, frankly, it's really hard work.
And I can see how digital trust, right? So again, if we're thinking about digital trust as how are we creating trustworthy experiences? How are we operating as trustworthy stewards? How are we partnering with our constituents and our users to create meaning in places where they're not? Boy, with that definition, digital trust is perfectly encapsulated in that sort of entrepreneurial spirit, right? So we have limited constraints, the constraints of the tools and resources we have, the requirements that we have to fulfill in order to, say, execute a process through technology or move a student or a learner through something like an application or course registration. But it is that friction that when we tie to the that's where the really interesting stuff comes up, and we can look at things like what University of Michigan has done with their cybersecurity awareness tool set and come up with kind of just really fabulous creative ways to push forward these concepts. So I really see how those really interject with each other. Now, Donna, I'm looking back at our talking points, and I think we both handshook agree to talk about this.
Okay.
Donna, how does AI fit into the conversation around digital trust? Or I don't know if you've heard of this thing. It's called I think it's called artificial intelligence. Augmented intelligence is a nom de plume that's kind of floated around our space, but yeah, AI, digital trust, cybersecurity. Let's not go that far. AI and digital trust. What do you think?
We should come back to the cybersecurity one, because it's the month for that, and I think we've got a question that we were asked to that we can circle back around on it. Yeah, the phenomena of AI and what we've seen over the last 2.5 years, I think, has been a really it's just fascinating to watch how quickly it's moving. And how ubiquitous, I think sometimes we're skeptical about how quickly a technology will be adopted until one shows up where suddenly it's either a lot of fun or really engaging or captures our imagination. And certainly generative AI has done all of those things. So I love that our campuses and ASU and U of T both have pretty sizable communities that are engaged in task forces and communities of practice and trying to figure out as quickly as possible, how do we harness all of that in ways that will be transformative. But I think when it comes to digital trust, we've got this unique opportunity to think about and really in a way that that was maybe a little bit more elusive in the past, to think about actively combating mistrust and distrust and trying to figure out how do we use what we can see and then asking it is that trustworthy? If it's not, why? If I'm assuming trust, what were the characteristics that kind of let me feel like that was a trustworthy response? Ask better questions. I think that's some of the more interesting work that we're seeing that's happening with pedagogy and happening as we understand better how to do teaching and learning inside of an AI-enabled world, is being faster and better at asking ourselves questions. I think our challenge is, can we then turn that into, I'm going to come back to what I was talking about very early, extensions of trust. How quickly can we not only be swimming downstream in the waters of what AI is giving us, but then kind of pushing upstream.
Mm.
It's salmon season here, so like 5 ravines and all of the salmon are swimming upstream. So I've got lots of metaphors that have salmon running upstream this time of year. But how do we push further upstream in terms of how we then say, oh my goodness, I'm now aware of an entire body of knowledge that I've tapped into because of a generative AI engine that sucked up a lot of knowledge. And now I can see a set of capabilities, a set of experts that I may not have even known exist. And so our question as institutions, I think, is how do we make that as porous as possible so you can then be in the room with that set of people who are doing these incredible areas of expertise. Research universities like ours, where we look across our campuses and there's, $1.5 billion worth of research activity. Like I think it's a pretty incredible opportunity to crack open some trust and curiosity with that.
I think that's I think that's a really fascinating angle and something that I too and connect to, and our work connects to, because when we think about this idea of credentialing and what our role is as an institution as sort of being the arbitrator that says, yes, this person did this, no, this person did not do this. There is a huge relationship with trust and veracity that exists there. And I think that there's this interesting crossover that can happen where we can get to a place where, to your point, a generative AI can answer a really complex question and be able to point you back to the verified identity of the researcher that birthed that idea, right? And being able to walk down that line towards areas of knowledge, towards areas of expertise, seems really crucial in both opening up that knowledge and making it available, while simultaneously recognizing the primacy of human trust is around relationships and experiences, right? So how do we get to this place where we can have these records of achievement or accomplishment that are signed, sealed, delivered, very effective, very trustworthy, overlapping with it, this immense potential for discovery like you just described. Oh, how cool. I think there's a lot to look forward to.
I want to pull that into one of the questions that we were asked. I think one of our students asked about some easily preventable information security incidents, because it's that month where we're thinking a lot about that. And I want to answer that with a story of an experience that your teams had at ASU, and kind of get your thoughts on it. There was a researcher from ASU who had spent the week prior to getting caught in a pretty nasty spear phishing attempt. She'd spent the week prior on a reservation. So she's back from the reservation, had only been back like 2 days, and gets an email that is incredibly well crafted, like beautifully artisanally crafted, alerting her to a potential health exposure, virus exposure that she might have had on the reservation. So your teams had done some AI red teaming, seeing what kind of capabilities Gen AI could have based on publicly available information from researchers on campus. It's actually pretty straightforward to think of how you might script being able to write an artisanally perfect phishing email. So back in the day, like 2 years ago, we might have said, hey, if it looks fishy, it probably is. Well, now, if it looks too good to be true, it probably is. And if it looks too close to you, it probably is. So she panics. They hit exactly a moment in time where she would have possibly been exposed, on the heels of us being more attentive towards messages coming from institutions. It looked like it came from the institution. The header was really close. The email address was close enough. So she goes in, gives it her credentials because it's a spoofed page from the university. The next thing it does is asks for a Duo passcode. So something she hadn't done before, but she goes to Duo, generates a passcode, hands it over. Bad guys then completely scripted, add a secondary device to her Duo account. Next thing we know, they've gone in and they've scripted inside of her Outlook, sending out a whole bunch more emails now coming from her. We've got a third voice. So if somebody's got a question, I'll stop. Okay. So another 100 emails or so go out of her account. So now they're exploiting the fact that she's got a trusted EDU email to then catch more folks. I do think that these are really real. For as much as there's this opportunity for us to extend trust, to think about provenance with where something originates. There's also this other side of the speed and accuracy by which you can do something just good enough to fool somebody is very real. So to the question, what are some easily preventable things? If it looks too good to be true, it might be. If it hits you in a place that makes you have an emotional response and click into a sense of urgency, you might actually be in the midst of being socially engineered. If it asks you to do something that is different from your workflow, it's worth stopping and hit up Teams and ask one of your colleagues, "Hey, this feels different. Did we change something?" Because even the slightest difference could be an indicator that you're actually being socially engineered. It's a crazy time, Kate.
Yeah, and Donna, I think what I'm also hearing and what I know from inside of our organization as well is easily preventable information security incidents are being managed by your institution, my institution, all of our institutions 24/7, 365. There is a constant barrage of potential incidents that are happening at all times. And so, a part of me also wants to say, like, easily preventable is we're already handling that. To Donna's point, what we're talking about is the influx of novelty, the increase in sophistication. Down here in the US, again with the election, the number of text messages that are going around, email, phone calls, right? The sophistication there is changing. And so, Donna, I think the advice that you're providing to everybody is great, which is like, does it feel good? Does this seem right?
Does it seem right?
If it doesn't, ask a colleague. Yeah, check, follow your gut, because we all come to know the cultures of our organizations, the types of things that we're asking for. But also internally as engineering staff and teams, again, trustworthiness. How are we building trustworthiness how are we creating those relationships with our constituents so they will come to expect excellence from us and balk at, the typo in the subject header, the tone of the please do this, the border of the Duo page. We can set those expectations every day by adhering to our mission and adhering to our values from a technology perspective.
I think we've got maybe one or two questions that were submitted in advance, and we may have some others that are asked. I'm going to ask one that came in about how do we design technologies that are able to interface or rely on not so secure infrastructure and libraries. And the motivation that they offered with this one is around supply chain attacks for software dependencies. So I think that's a really interesting question, and I'm curious if you think about the work that you do amongst engineers. Are there things that you're seeing that you would advise for engineering teams in terms of how we think about the interdependencies that we have especially when so much of us are really, um, I think, contributing to and eager to make more robust open source environments.
Kudos to whoever wrote this absolute grad school level question. I really appreciate it. How do you design technologies to be able to interface or rely on not so secure infrastructure and libraries? I think my response number one is the same ways, this with the same tools that we always have, because this is the gig, right? When we're talking about building technologies, I have a humanities background, like I said. I'm not a by education engineer architect by any means, but working with our teams extensively, all those years of knowledge, we are coming with those toolkits, baby, right? Because you're constantly having to butt up against extremely valuable, time unlocking, force multiplying technologies that just do not have the same values that we might bring to our highly, for us, our healthcare related data, our student related data, our research related data. So to the person that asked that question, look in your heart, you've known all along. I mean, that's a that's too true. But taking a step back and really trying to be a little bit more serious about it for us, trying to think about how do we continue to push the envelope forward on building trust out into our upstream and downstream systems. This is a whole line around data centric versus application centric architectures, right? So
Yep,
this
yep.
zero trust environments, this is digital credentials, this is a lot of the direction that supply chain is going in, where we need to ask our upstream and downstream data partners to get serious about securing data at the source of data, right? And really effectively focusing in on the types of graph, knowledge base, and sort of proof-based systems where we can effectively be able to tell, I mean, literal supply chain, right? That I can get a bottle of olive oil from Italy that I can, whose supply chain I can track through a like L4 extension of the Ethereum chain, like which farm this came from, right? We're doing this, we're getting there, but it's about putting that pressure on for where it really matters.
Yeah, and I think again, I'll come back to I think a responsibility that comes into higher ed pretty specifically. Like we can demonstrate what that looks like. We can decide it is okay for us to make the space and time and not only assume that it's a good thing to do, but actually make sure that we spend the time doing that extra level of effort to bring some transparency, to bring the right kind of documentation, to expose the right set of things that'll help us to then interrogate the vulnerabilities, to actually participate in the communities that matter. So whether it's figuring out, where's verified credentials going, we can sit on the W3C. We can sit with One EdTech. We can sit with Aaron, the Internet Registry. Like we can actually sit at the table and say, hey, we are one of many sectors that are participating, but we're one that offers some pretty special affordances and some opportunities to model things out and do it in a way that we do everything else that we do as universities, but do it in a way that actually increases learning across the board. Kind of fun times. Okay, so I think we got like 5 minutes. Any other questions from our audience? Kate, did we miss anything?
I mean, of course, this could be a 6-hour conversation. There would still be interesting things to talk about. But it's been such a pleasure to connect with you and connect with our fabulous audience. I do note that, again, Russell, thank you for being a participant here. One of G. Hinton's main concerns regarding AI is that it will be, quote, better at crafting a targeted real message than any human possibly could. Yeah, isn't that exciting? Any rapid fire responses to that?
Yeah, well, I think about it a lot because deep fakes are a very real thing. I do wonder if it's not a bit of a call to action for each of us to find our own voices to figure out what is it about your life journey and the way you came about where you're at today and how you're contributing to the work that we're doing in a way that is so authentic and it's so clearly you that you couldn't really be deep faked. That it just exudes the humanness that each of us bring. And if we kind of allowed ourselves that, somewhere in that space between being super super vulnerable and super super confident, because we knew we had each other's backs and we knew we were going to be there to support one another. Then I think we can kind of combat this social engineering. It'll sound, like I said, it'll sound too good to be true because you won't actually hear the voice of the people around us that we either already know and love dearly or that we want to get to know better. So I think it's kind of an interesting opportunity for us to lean into that authenticity.
Yeah, I think that there's a future conversation possibly with Russell joining us as well, where we could really dig into like what does digital authenticity mean. The way that I would riff off of that, I think, is something that you pulled in too, which is again thinking about our trust networks, thinking about the knowledge graph of our trusted relationships, connections, sources. I think those are going to emerge as really powerful tools, right? So if the people around me that I have built real intimate relationships with trust a source, that's probably a clear signal for me that that source is meaningful for me and connects with me. And I really look forward to the sort of Web3 version of relationship management that is sure to emerge as we lean more towards a data-centric view of the world as opposed to an application-centric view of the world.
Hey, any closing thoughts as we finish up today?
Just lovely to be here. Lovely. I'm so grateful for the opportunity to join you all at University of Toronto for your Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And feel free to come visit us over at asu.edu if you'd like to learn more about our work, the work of the Trusted Learner Network, a really cute conversation that Donna and I had in an autonomous vehicle is linked down here at the bottom. But yeah, at ASU we love collaborating. So also feel free to reach out to me. You can get my email address through Donna, and would love to talk about whatever. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. And to the whole community that joined us today, I think we have these really unique opportunities to sit down and ask ourselves, how to build more trust in the way we work together, the actual technologies and the projects themselves that we're putting together. I'm so excited about where this conversation can lead, and I think it's kind of early days for concepts like this. We're just in the space of trying to figure out, to Russell's point, like what is blockchain useful for? How do we think about digital identities? How do we think about digital credentials? Like we are still figuring all that stuff out. So I can't wait to see where all of this goes and to continue the conversation. Thank you, Kate.
Thank you, Donna.